The midterm elections are 6 weeks from today, if you can believe it, and Democrats are cautiously optimistic about their chances. They're now up 12 points in the NBC News Wall Street Journal generic ballot. So here's Donald Trump's rallying cry to his fellow Republicans. Short and sweet, late last night in the form of a tweet. Remember the midterms! But Trump might have real reason to worry. That same poll showed 59% of registered voters want a significant change in the way he's leading the country. You know a little bit about midterm elections. What do you think?
Look,
don't give me any spin, then for your donors.
No.
Tell me.
The Democrats are going to win the House of Representatives, but because of redistricting, it's not going to be like the 60 seats that the Republicans won in the last wave in 2010. More like the 33 seats that the Democrats won in 2006. If there's a wave, the Democrats will win the House. The question is whether this generic is strong enough to propel the Democrats to the majority in the Senate. I think that's going to be worth
Okay, and
One other thing, this generic shrinks towards the end, so it's not going to be 12 points at the end. That's right.
So let's talk about whether that wave can reach the Texas Senate race. And I want to read what you wrote about the Republican candidate there, Ted Cruz, because it made my year. This is you writing in today's New York Times about Ted Cruz. He's like a serpent covered in Vaseline because he treats the American people like two-bit suckers in 10-gallon hats, because he sucks up to the guy who insulted his wife, by retweet no less, because of his phony piety and even phonier principles, because I see him as the spiritual love child of the 1980s televangelist Jimmy Swaggart and Jack Nicholson's character in The Shining, because his ethics are purely situational, because he makes Donald Trump look like a human being by comparison, because New York values, because his fellow politicians detest him, and that's just among Republicans, because he never got over being the smartest kid in 8th grade, because he's conniving enough to try to put one over on you, but not perceptive enough to realize that you see right through him, because he's the type of man who would sell his family into slavery if that's what it took to get elected, and that he would use said slavery as a sob story to get himself reelected. Otherwise, you might say I'm his #1 fan. You voting for Beto?
Was that cathartic to write? I'm just wondering, did I miss something?
But seriously, I mean, put your political analyst hat on. Do you think that makes him vulnerable? I mean, this, I feel like, has been something I've known since 1999 or 2000. Now I feel like everybody knows, thanks in part to your very descriptive words today. But do you think that makes him more vulnerable, that everyone knows that he's despised in the Republican Party?
I think it ought to. I mean, because there's something about Ted Cruz that he's not like the ordinary. I mean, you know, there's sort of ordinary political slipperiness with some notable, honorable exceptions, and then there's the full can of grease that he sort of that he represents. Look, I do think he's vulnerable. The fact that it's so close in Texas really does tell you something. It also tells you how much candidate quality matters. You have in Beto O'Rourke a guy who's charismatic, who looks like he's a human being, who sounds like a normal person, and who seems to be able to rise to the rhetorical occasion. And that contrast with Ted Cruz is so powerful. And by the way, you know, not least, Cruz did himself no favors in the election by the way in which he was on again, off again with Trump. I think, frankly, for Republicans, you're either all in or you're all out. You're either on the side of Flake and McCain or you're a Trumpkin. His Hamlet act is hurting him today.
I mean, what's left to say? That column was pretty vicious. I think, you know, good politicians are able to pretend like they're not pretending, right? You can act natural, even though that's what you're trying to do, is act natural. And Ted Cruz just doesn't do that. Ted Cruz is someone who, when you look at him, you realize that his eye is on the next seat that he can attain. And I think what was fortunate for him was that he came around at a time when people in the Republican Party were rewarding this type of ambition, the whole knock it all down type approach that he was bringing to governance. And I just don't think we're there now. I think we've turned as a country. We're away from let's rip it all down. Republicans are now in charge, and they want to know, well, what are you actually doing? And he cannot point to much. And I think that's really hampering him. And then to your point about Beto, you know, put aside the charisma and all the live streaming, I mean, if you're looking at sheer money, the guy brought in $9 million in 1 month. That is astronomical. That's a good Senate year, basically. Right. He did it in a month. So he will have the money to play in that race.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.